that's a good point, Mary. The number of attendees today may be nowhere near the number that will, since it's going to be recorded,
Mm-hmm.
will be reviewed later. So we'll reach a big population.
Yeah, and we'll have it on our website with a link to our YouTube channel and also on our PPN Elections Facebook page, which I'll mention at the end too.
Well, the majority of the audience may be watching the recorded version then. It's 4:01, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time about trying to get out of here as scheduled. So,
Yeah.
Any complaints about moving ahead?
Nope.
Well, actually, at the moment, until somebody else checks in, I can kind of skip a little bit of the introduction because the group that is here knows why we're here and what we're doing and the format of what we're going to do. So as you already know, of the three parts, the first part is that each of our candidates, Ms. Landis and Mr. Gillespie, will have 4 minutes each to talk about themselves, background, platform, anything they want to promote about why they think they're the best candidate. And then we'll move into part two of questions. And we have our three presenters here already with us, Mary Zoller-Leitner, Jacqueline Gottlieb, and Callie Moore. And I'll want to say a little bit more for the recording about the organizations that they represent that are sponsoring this, but we will do that as we move forward, why don't we? So Mary, if you are ready with your timekeeping, why don't we go ahead and get started with our candidates, and we'll let Mr. Gillespie go first. So, sir, you have 4 minutes to tell us about your candidacy.
Thank you, Harry. Good afternoon. Let me first say thank you to you and everyone that worked to put this together. I think these type of events always have been important, but are even more important now with COVID-19 because the candidates have not had the opportunity to meet with the voters like we would in a normal year. My name is Carl Gillespie. I'm a fifth-generation Maconian. I'm married to Janet Taylor Gillespie, and we have one son, Logan. I'm a member of the First United Methodist Church here in Franklin. I spent 17 years working throughout the United States with some travel abroad installing communication systems. In 1999, I started National Communications Incorporated with one technician. Since then, NCI has grown into a regional company providing installation and maintenance of all types of low voltage communication systems. I'm actively involved in our community as a member of the Macon County Board of Commissioners, past member of Southwestern Community College Board of Trustees. I'm currently Vice President of North Carolina Cattlemen's Association and a member of the Macon County Farm Bureau Board of Directors. I have served on various other volunteer boards. Susan, thank you for being willing to participate in this debate. I want to take just a minute and thank everyone in Cherokee, Clay, Graham, and Macon County. Because I've been a county commissioner in Macon, my name was pretty well known there. However, that was not the case in the other three counties. As I traveled to Cherokee, Clay, and Graham counties and met with county commissioners, mayors, county managers, school board superintendents, sheriffs, and other leaders, I found two things. One is we were welcomed as one of their own. Janet and I will always remember how we were welcomed into business and homes of folks that we had never met before. The second thing I found is the issues that I've been involved with in Macon County are similar to the issues affecting our entire 120th district. Those issues, probably I'd say the number one issue that we've heard feedback on is affordable broadband. Like many other rural communities in Western North Carolina, the lack of affordable broadband is a huge issue. In some areas, 40% of our households do not have access to affordable broadband. Currently, USDA's E-Connectivity Program, North Carolina Great Grants, as well as local grants with government-private partnerships are all working to enhance broadband. The main issue, is deploying of the fiber optic technologies to support this. It's extremely expensive. And to make any impact, I feel it will require a substantial commitment by federal and state government. Second issue, I tie two things together: sustainable employment opportunities and economic development, which so much of our economy is tourist-driven. We need to continue to develop that industry. In addition to attracting new businesses in the area, we need to encourage and support our existing businesses to expand and grow. Third issue is education. First and foremost, we must fund our K-12 schools at a level so our children can compete on a global playing field. We need to create a pathway for technical training and admission to undergraduate studies. Second, we must fund our community college and provide specialized training in trade fields that we desperately need. I was fortunate to have been served on the Board of Trustees for Southwestern Community College, and it gave me opportunity to see how community colleges change lives. I look forward to working with Southwestern Community College and Tri-County Community College to ensure that they have the tools they need. Fourth issue, which is near and dear to me, is the preservation of our natural resources. We are blessed with a natural beauty that many areas do not have. The land, air, and water that we all benefit from must be preserved for future generations. I believe this can be done while using those resources for outdoor recreation and tourism and maintaining the small town atmosphere, rural character that we so much enjoy in Western North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillespie. And now as we turn to our other candidate, let me back up and say that being an old man, I'm not on top of technology here, so I didn't realize there may be 2,000 people watching this right now, but Susan Bean is so good at technology, we don't see any of them. They're there. I've been contacted by them to say that we are watching, but we don't see them on our screens. So for those of you out there that are watching, I apologize for the abbreviated introduction. We, of course, are speaking today with Mr. Carl Gillespie that you just heard from, the Republican candidate from Macon County for House District 120, covering Western North Carolina. And now we're going to turn our attention to Ms. Susan Landis, the Democratic candidate from Cherokee County. So, Susan, you now have 4 minutes to present yourself.
Well, my name is Susan Landis, and I live in Murphy, or outside of town anyway in Murphy. I have lived in Murphy for 7 years, and my husband and I moved here after we retired. I'm originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Excuse me. And I ended up living all over the place when I was a kid. My father was in the Marines, and so I lived in Arizona and went to elementary school there. I actually lived on the base at Cherry Point here in North Carolina for a while, and also a place near there because they didn't have housing for us at the time. I lived on a farm in Middle Tennessee for a while. So I've kind of moved all over, but from the time I went to high school and beyond, I lived in Chattanooga and had my career there. My background is in psychology. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree. I worked in mental health for about 10 years, working for a psychiatric hospital and then the psychiatric clinic. And then I went into the school system once my children were starting to be born, and worked for 28 years as a school psychologist. So after retirement, then we moved here. My husband is a retired special ed teacher. We have 3 grown daughters who are scattered around the country, and all of them work in science fields. And hope to later on explain a little bit about what they do, because they have taught me a lot about things like the environmental science, water quality. I have a daughter who actually works in that field. I have a daughter who is working on a fire right now in Colorado as part of her work with the National Park Service. The issues that I have a special interest in are not that different from what Carl stated. Broadband is just essential, and that is the one thing that comes up over and over and over. It's an issue for me. I have satellite internet because I live in such a rural area. I don't even have cell phone service at my house. So my only options are bad and worse. So if I freeze up while we're doing this today, that's why. And I'm really sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it, or I would. So broadband is just, that's essential for everybody. And it's not just for individuals or schools, but it's for any kind of business, large or small. Other issues have to do with healthcare. I'm especially interested in the expansion of Medicaid in North Carolina and the steps that it's going to take to do that. In this part of the state, we're seeing hospitals close down, and a couple of them are kind of on life support. You know, they're still open, but just barely. That's a real concern, because a lot of people, as they get older, are not comfortable traveling 2 hours to Asheville or Chattanooga or Atlanta to a doctor, a specialist. So healthcare is a real issue, and there's a lot of different problems with it. Not only how you pay for it, but also the access to it, because we don't have the kind of specialists here that we need. So I would like to see a program that encourages these specialists to come here, heart specialists or, you know, bone doctors or something like that, so people don't have to travel so far to get services. Their education has been stripped of money for a long time in North Carolina. And having been a student in North Carolina, I remember when the education was excellent, probably the best in the South. It's not that anymore. And the schools have been starved for money. And the thing that aggravates me is they say, oh, well, you know, it's not a money problem. We don't know. The schools have never, for one single day, had the money that they needed for education. Not a single day. They're always scrimping and saving. And having worked in schools with various principals, different superintendents, I worked in probably 50 different schools in my career. None of them had enough money. If they got a government grant to get something like computers, they didn't have anybody who knew how to operate them or knew how to connect them up. So education is just a huge issue. And I know of families that live here in Cherokee County that are moving to Georgia because they know that the education offered to them there is better. So I'll stop with that, but that's at least 3 of the issues that I'm really interested in addressing.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Landis. I appreciate both of you with your brevity here. We will now go to the second round. And in this situation, we have each of our panelists, one at a time, will be asking some questions, and each candidate will have 3 minutes apiece to individually answer these questions. Now, our first panelist, if I may introduce, Ms. Mary Zoller-Leitner. She is the president of the Public Policy Network of Western North Carolina and North Georgia. We shorten that and call it PPN. The PPN is a civic organization. It was formed 4 years ago with the purpose of keeping an eye on state and national policy proposals that would possibly affect individuals here in Western North Carolina and North Georgia. So the PPN is an all-volunteer group. They provide data, information, and resources so that the citizens in our area can make informed decisions about policies that will affect their lives. And they put this information out through the website, the Facebook page, and they have monthly community forums that feature local leaders speaking on topics. And the topics are as diverse as voting in the area of COVID and the era, or living wages, or affordable housing. Gerrymandering is another one they recently had a presentation on, well attended, I understand, and Medicaid expansion. Now, because of COVID, all of these programs are being held on Zoom. I dare offer that the PPN is striving hard to be nonpartisan and present all of the facts of these topics, and they're open to anybody, anywhere that would like to listen, so that you know as much as you possibly can. So with that, Mary Leitner, would you like to ask some healthcare questions?
Thanks, Harry.
Oh.
This is a rather long preface to this question, but I wanted to share some statistics you may or may not be familiar with. Clay, Cherokee, Macon, and Grand counties form House District 120. This represents 80,590 individuals with 18,000 or 18.5% of adults aged 18 to 64 without health insurance. This is higher than the North Carolina average of 14% without health insurance. These numbers are pre-COVID and don't include all of the persons who have lost health insurance as they've lost their jobs. Since 2012, Roger West and our current Republican House Representative Kevin Corbin have always voted with the North Carolina General Assembly against the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion. The Republicans in our state legislature speak of managed care and transformation of health care occurring possibly in 2021. But whatever plans may come are still going to leave out 18,500 residents of the district without affordable comprehensive health insurance that may not include any pre-existing conditions they have. So I'm wondering, what would you as our representative do in terms of supporting initiatives to provide health insurance for the uninsured, either through the Affordable Care Act or through Medicaid expansion?
Shall we start with Ms. Landis first this time?
Okay.
Okay. You know, a lot of times I think people don't really understand what Medicaid expansion means. And what it means is that people who live a little bit above the poverty level, so they're not rich, they're not middle class, but they're barely able to make ends meet, but they don't make enough money usually to be able to afford health insurance. Or they may have 2 or 3 part-time jobs and they don't have an opportunity to get it through their work. The Medicaid expansion kind of picks up those people, and that's what it means. I think some people think Medicaid expansion is going to catch everybody that doesn't have health insurance, but that's not true. It's just people that I've read different amounts, but it's about 133% of the poverty level to 140% of the poverty level. So I think Medicaid expansion is essential. Medicaid expansion, the actual cost of it, 90% of that cost is paid for by the federal government. That's our tax dollars that we are already collecting, that we're already getting, that are going out to other states that have decided to expand Medicaid. North Carolina, the only reason we don't have it is political. That's the only reason, that the Republicans in the General Assembly don't want it, because it means to them, I guess, a giving in somehow. But when you think about what a bargain it is, that 90% of it will be paid by the federal government, it's just ridiculous. It's hard to understand why our state doesn't have it. That said, if you look at the history, each state had to decide when the Affordable Care Act came in. They had to decide, if they were going to adopt. And it took a long time for them to decide to adopt parts of it, of the Affordable Care Act, just like it did with Social Security. Social Security, I think it took something like 40 years before Social Security was fully adopted by the states. So I think we're still early in the process. I'm really hopeful that the Medicaid expansion will eventually be adopted by North Carolina. I think part of the problem is that people look at healthcare as an all or nothing proposition. They throw out terms like single payer. And again, a lot of people don't really understand what that means. Single payer is what a lot of countries have, but we have this huge, huge system in the United States that involves hundreds of thousands of employees that work for insurance companies, and you can't just wipe that away. So this is something I see as being incremental to move toward eventually, maybe, a single payer system. Between now and that, there's a whole lot of other things that could happen that would help. The expansion of Medicaid is part of that, but the other part of it is the Affordable Care Act and strengthening that. At one time or another, all three of my daughters have had their health insurance through the ACA. And what happens if you have a child in college, generally they can be on the parent's health insurance. Well, then they get out of college. It's rare that someone who's 24, 25 years old walks into a full-time job that's going to pay them enough to live on and also have health benefits. That was true for my children. None of them had that. So what they did for a few years was cobble together part-time jobs. These were generally kind of low-wage jobs, not necessarily basic entry level. So they might make $12 an hour, but it was only for 15 hours a week. And then they would have to, one of my daughters actually had 6 part-time jobs at one point just to make a living. And of course, she didn't have health care with any of those. The ACA allowed all 3 of my daughters to be able to have health care coverage. So that, especially if they had something catastrophic, and if you're 26, 28 years old and you break a leg, that's catastrophic if you're living off very little money to begin with. It was really a lifesaver, and it helped me because I didn't feel like that I needed to provide money for them to be able to afford health care. And I didn't have to worry that they didn't have health care. And that interim period was, I don't know, maybe about 3 years for them. But things have changed. It's not like it was when I got out of college, where I walked right into a job that had benefits. That doesn't happen anymore. So the ACA needs to be strengthened so that people have the opportunity to get health care. There have been a lot of complaints. There's some fixes that need to be done with the ACA. There were some plans that were not very practical at all. They were cheap, but you didn't really get to take advantage of them. But there are fixes that can be done to it. And that's what I would like to see happen to address this.
All right, thank you, Ms. Landis. Mr. Gillespie, can you remember that long-winded preface that Mary Zoller-Leitner presented? And are you ready to respond? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Harry. I think one of the key points that perhaps we neglect to have conversation about in regards to the question that was asked is what is the cost of those uninsured? What is the overall cost on not only on our economy but on our healthcare system? So when we start talking about this, I think we need first, and I don't have enough time to get into all of that, but I think we need to step back and look at what the cost actually is for these folks that are not eligible for health care. Speaking specifically to Medicaid expansion, Susan mentioned earlier it's 90% paid by the federal government. I think that, in my opinion, Medicaid expansion is one of those things that we need to all sit around the table and come up with something that we feel like we can live with. I think some of the proposals that have been floated through the legislature included a small copay, and then I think, if memory serves me correctly, if you make a minimum wage, it's like $20 a month was that copay. I think I'm correct on that. And then I believe there was an employment prerequisite. So I think that it's certainly logical to have those conversations about Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. But I also think that it's logical to have those conversations of some caveats that go along with that. Now I'll go back where I started. I think it's imperative that when we talk about our healthcare system, when we talk about those who are uninsured, even though they're uninsured, they still have healthcare needs. Some of those healthcare needs end up being more significant by the time they go for treatment because they didn't have insurance to begin with. If we'd have been treating it earlier, it wouldn't have been as expensive in the end. So I think it's real important that we take those things into consideration when we're having this conversation. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Given that it is a majority Republican General Assembly right now, what would you be willing to vote against a majority if they were opposed to Medicaid expansion?
I see that question's for me. Yes, I'm there to represent the citizens of the 120th district, and I will work as hard as I can with my fellow legislators, irregardless of which side of the aisle they're on, and to work to have a solution to things like Medicaid expansion. Stalemate benefits nobody. So I'm not going to sit here and throw stones at either party, but I will say that I will work with both parties to come up with a solution that best benefits the citizens of North Carolina, which is who ultimately will send me there if they choose to. Okay,
thank you. My second question has to do with COVID. At least 194,381 people in North Carolina have tested positive for COVID, and 3,247 people have died. What would you advocate for to reduce the number of people infected and getting infected and dying of this virus? Carl, you want to go first this time?
Sure. If I really knew the answer to that question, I probably could sell it and make a lot of money. I mean, we have we have all struggled with what's adequate, what's essential, what's adequate, what do we need to do to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Early on in Macon County, as with all counties and at state and federal level, there was task force that were put together, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in the one in Macon County. And as we had those morning meetings, it evolved daily, and it's still evolving today. I think that there's certainly science that is out there that says that social distancing, wearing masks, all these type of things certainly increases your likelihood of exposure. But it's an ever evolving issue in regards to what steps we need to take. And I don't know that we have one that's 100% yet.
Susan, same question for you, Susan Lance.
I've read a lot about this, partly just because I read a whole lot. I read news, I read books, I read magazines, I just read. And the science is pretty clear that if you wear a mask, that gives you not foolproof protection, but it does give you a fair amount of protection. It's the best we have right now. That and social distancing. Fresh air, that seems to be something that is helpful. Whether you're indoors, outdoors, you need fresh air blowing everything away. So what's really frustrating has been all the backlash, the anti-maskers, the stores that won't enforce it, the sheriff's departments that won't enforce it. That's maddening. I can remember growing up when polio was a concern. And I can remember all the things that the country did to try to prevent kids, especially, from catching polio. And I see this as similar in that there's a risk of death, there's a risk of long-term illness because of getting COVID. And why are we not using everything in our arsenal to keep it from spreading? I think that the focus on masks has gotten all twisted up with, rights and people not understanding. I think the federal government has not been clear at all about what people should do. There's been very little leadership. And at first people didn't have masks. I mean, who keeps masks? So it's been very slow. And you can see that other countries have handled this whole problem a lot better than we have. So clearly we're doing something wrong. I think that the word has finally gotten out that masks help, but it's not great. Where was I? I was somewhere just the other day, and I saw about 20 people coming and going out of the building. Seems like it was a restaurant or a store or something. Didn't see a single mask, not one, right here in Murphy. I haven't been going in stores, so I can't really vouch for inside the stores if people are wearing masks or not, because I mostly stay home. I think that there's a lot that could be done, but it starts with the leadership and not having leadership and not having enforcement, and by enforcement, I don't mean you have to slap a fine on somebody, but just to let the citizens know this is an expectation and it's your duty as a citizen. Being a citizen isn't easy. It's not free. It means that everybody has a responsibility. And this is one of those responsibilities. And this is a time for people to step up and show that they're being a good citizen. So I wear my mask when I'm out, when I'm near anybody, even if we're socially distanced. I was in our headquarters today, and there were two people in there at opposite ends of the room. And I was kind of between them, and we were socially distanced, but we all wore our masks because one of the people there is older than me, and she certainly doesn't need to get COVID. I don't want it. I'm doing everything I can not to get it. So, you know, I think a lot of this could have been handled better with good leadership from the federal government all the way down. I'm glad that Governor Cooper shut things down when he did. I'm glad things have opened back up. There are some things I question, you know, why they're open. They're not exactly essential services. I understand people need to work, but if people will put in safety measures and do it safely, then it's fine.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Okay, does that cover your questions, Mary?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much. So we'll go to our next panelist. And if I did not say, let me be sure and state that the three panelists and the three organizations that they're here representing, these organizations are the promoters, the presenters of today's forum. They are the people that put this forum together. So our next panelist is Dr. Jacqueline Gottlieb, President and CEO of the Hinton Center. Now, the Hinton Center has a mission to engage individuals, congregations, so as you can see, they're religiously affiliated, and communities in transformation through retreat ministry, missional outreach. Locally, we know the Hinton Center is a beautiful retreat and conference center that overlooks Lake Chatuge in Hayesville. But they have a mission agency that provides year-round opportunities for volunteers to work with their neighbors on projects to enhance the long-term quality of life in our area. A couple of which are the Safe and Healthy Home Repair Ministry and the Firewood and Garden Ministry. So without further ado, I believe Jackie has some questions related to financial security, jobs, and economic development. So Jackie, I'll turn it over to you and who you want to start with.
All right. So my first question is, our region has historically been riddled with economic challenges. What strategies do you propose to improve our economic outlook, and how will you get the attention and necessary support of others in the House to address the needs in our area, which are often overlooked and underfunded? Carl, would you like to start?
Be glad to. First off, to the Hinton Center. Great. It's a great organization. It's been serving the community for many, many years. I have to admit, until about 5 years ago, I didn't know about the Hinton Center. And I still remember my first visit there and thought, how in the world could I be from Western North Carolina and not know about the Hinton Center? What a beautiful facility and a great, great job that y'all do. You know, we feel like so many times that in the rural part of Western North Carolina that our voice is unheard, and it is. But the interesting thing in talking to several of my fellow county commissioners in the eastern part of the state, they feel the same way. They have a lot of the same challenges that we do. I jokingly say that they have sand and we have mountains is basically the only difference, but they tend to point out some other things to me as well. But I think that one way that we can help gain some momentum in the legislature is to not forget those folks that are from rural North Carolina, the eastern part of North Carolina that's so very rural. And if we can come together and partner with those guys, you know, we represent not as many people, but we certainly represent a lot of square area, a lot of acreage. And that when you start taking that as a percentage of the state of North Carolina, there's a significant amount of the state of North Carolina that is represented by those areas. So I think number one, we have to partner with those folks to help get our voice heard. Second thing, excuse me, the second thing that will help us is so many times we see solutions that come from the legislature that sometimes are compromised in our view that they don't apply to us. While they may apply 95% of the situations in the metropolitan areas, it doesn't work for rural areas. So I think that I don't think we can should go in and say it's a bad idea. I think we should go in and with the thought that was a great idea to work in the metropolitan areas. Maybe we need to have another plan for the rural areas. So because putting the shoe on the other foot, I think that a strategy that will serve us well in our rural communities is not necessarily a good strategy for in the cities. So I would be one to be an advocate of having multiple approaches to problems instead of one approach for everyone's problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Susan?
You know, this is a bigger problem than North Carolina, or a bigger problem than this part of the state and other parts of the state. I was just reading an article the other day about how the divide in the United States is becoming more and more the urban versus the rural. And whether you live in rural Kansas or, rural parts of Montana or rural parts of North Carolina, the issues are very similar. I think that so much of the legislation is geared for cities and big city problems and not so much for rural areas. Part of it is because they don't hear us, they don't see us. I've been shocked in some of the volunteer work that I do at the number of people in Raleigh who have no idea where Cherokee County is. I mean, they really don't. There was one woman who was going to come here to speak to a group from Raleigh, and her person who was traveling with her and was making the arrangements said, well, we'll leave probably around 8 o'clock in the morning from Raleigh and see you at noon. And I said, no, not if you're driving in a car. They just really have no idea that we are 360 miles away from Raleigh. Especially if you mention Cherokee, they think you mean the town of Cherokee as opposed to the county. That's a whole nother problem. So part of it is a problem countrywide. Two of the things I think that would really help would be broadband, which we've already talked about, and roads. In this area, I see that not having better roads, more access, physical access, I think hurts the growth of the area. And a lot of people say, oh, well, we don't want to become Atlanta. We're not going to become Atlanta. Atlanta doesn't want to live up here. But we can't get some of the things that we need. People are intimidated by mountain roads. They look at the Nantahala Gorge and go, I'm not taking my truck on that road. They don't really, I mean, who knows to go to Robbinsville to get to Tennessee? Most people don't take that unless you're on a motorcycle, then you're on that road. I think that we need more in terms of better roads, not more, but better roads. And there should be an emphasis on that. I think Corridor K would be a big help in that too. The broadband is essential because we just can't grow without reliable, good broadband. And no matter what you're doing, you have to have broadband, whether you have a restaurant or you're trying to order a pair of tennis shoes, you've got to have broadband. So I think those two things will help the economy of this area. You have to bring people here. They see how beautiful it is. They want to move here. They want to invest here. And I think that's what it's going to take. We have a lot going for us. We have great small towns. We have small town charm. We have viable downtowns. Franklin has a beautiful downtown area. But, you know, it's kind of tucked away over there and not that many people go there. So we need to get the people here, and they're not going to come on the roads we have.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, what is your position on passing legislation for a living wage? And what impact might this legislation have on our region? Is the living wage legislation a strategy to achieve some of your goals for our region? Ms. Landis, will you start?
The answer is yes. Plain and simple. We absolutely need a living wage. And a living wage varies, but most people agree it's around $15 an hour. At $15 an hour minimum wage, that allows somebody who's working full-time at a place like McDonald's to be able to afford housing and food and basic health care. Anybody who's working full-time at a job should be able to afford those things from that job. If you look, again, tells how old I am, but if you look back to when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, people could work at a factory job like my mother. My mother worked in a factory making little ceramic pieces and grinding them. This was manual, hard labor, standing on her feet all the time. She made enough money to support me and my sister and my brother. My father was in the service, so he would send money. But we also had a housekeeper. The housekeeper took care of us while my mother worked. My mother worked at night, so she could get 10 cents more an hour. But it was enough money for her, from her doing that, to be able to afford that. That's not true now. Now you need everybody on deck working one, sometimes two jobs or 1.5 jobs to be able to afford to pay the rent. The economy is just very different, and it hasn't changed in favor of the working person. It's changed in favor of the people who hire the people. I think a livable wage, it gets bad press. People think, oh, well, you're not going to pay $15 for a hamburger. You wouldn't have to pay that much. You might have to pay 50 cents more for McDonald's. If you went to a really nice restaurant, you might have to pay $2 more for that steak. It costs us in the long run. Those people take the people that earn that salary, turn around and spend it. They spend it in our own region. They're buying things with it. They're going shopping with it. They're, buying more groceries with it. So the money comes back to the community, but it lets people live with dignity. And I think our country can afford to do that.
Okay. Mr. Gillespie?
I think that we have to be careful when we start talking about passing legislation in North Carolina that along the lines of a minimum wage or a livable wage. I think it's and the reason I say that is I think it's a small Band-Aid on a much larger problem. And let's just, for example, let's pick that $15 an hour wage. Let's assume that we have determined through a study that if everybody made at least $15 an hour, that would be a standard. They would be able to maintain a living wage. The issue with that is if that's the case for September 22nd, 2020, you can rest assured it's not going to be the case for January 1st, 2021, January 1st, 2022. It's going to continue to increase. So what I would propose, rather than throwing money at it and fixing it for today, let's look and see why are we in this situation to begin with? Why is that individual not able to earn a living wage? Do we need additional training for that person? What do we need to do to put that person into a position where they can earn a living wage? And I think that is more of a long-term fix to the problem rather than just legislating it, because I don't think it's over with. I think we will continue to have to legislate it and legislate it and legislate it over and over again. And then, as mentioned earlier, then you get into that whole conversation about how much can the economy afford? And I don't know that $15 an hour is that threshold, but I do believe that at some point, and it may be 15, I'm not smart enough to know that, but I do believe at some point we are going, if you mandate that, if you legislate that, at some point you're going to get to the point where it won't work financially, it won't work for folks, and then it's going to be a real train wreck at that point.
Okay, thank you. So my third question is, there is a significant lack of affordable housing in our region, to the extent that this is a barrier to potential employers to bring business into our region. Not to mention that one of the effects is that there is little incentive or accountability in place for landlords to provide safe, healthy, and affordable housing for low to middle income residents. What strategies do you propose to address the lack of affordable housing and the current impact that it is having on many of our residents? Oh, I'm sorry, I should call on someone. Ms.
Which
Landis.
one?
That's fine.
I think that
This is really related to the other question. You need to pay people more. People who don't make a lot of money and are working full time are not shiftless people. They don't deserve to be making a pitiful amount of money for their work. Some people choose to have jobs like working in restaurants that traditionally does not pay a lot because it fits in with their child care plans, or it fits in with their husband's work schedule, or something like that. Not only should people be paid enough to be able to afford housing, but it's also an issue of their dignity. People feel like their work is worthless if they're not being paid enough. I really disagree with Carl that we can't afford $15 an hour. Some states are paying that anyway. Some cities are paying that anyway. I don't think the minimum wage has been increased. I want to say it's been about 11 years since it's been increased. It might be longer than that, but it's been a long time. The minimum wage people think is higher than it is. It's $7.25 an hour right now. And I know this because, like I said, my daughters went through a spell between college and getting, more permanent jobs where that's what they were making and trying to live on. And that's why, like I said, one of them had 6 jobs trying to cobble together enough to pay a rent. As far as housing in this area, I think that they can't keep up with the demands that are here already. So I think it's more complex. It's not just a matter of, oh, there's not housing for low income people. There's not a whole lot of housing for anybody right at the moment. That will change. The realtors, I know several realtors here that talk about how quickly property and houses are getting snatched up. My youngest daughter, who lives in Chattanooga, just recently bought a house just about a month ago. And they got kind of undercut on several houses because somebody would come in and offer more than the asking price. I mean, it's a seller's market right now. And in order to get a house, her husband went and looked at it, and offered money right then on the spot. My daughter hadn't even seen the house. It was the only way they could get a house. Things are almost like that here, where people, the realtors are reporting this, that they're so busy selling houses all day long, and there are not very many houses on the market. So that's one reason the price is up real high right now. From what I know, I think real estate, it's kind of boom or bust, you know, it seems to go up and down a lot. I think that low-income housing is always scarce in rural areas. There's not a huge demand for it. There's not a consistent demand. And I think the consistency is part of the problem. Unfortunately, we live in an area that's kind of transient. You have people that have lived here for a long, long time, and they may have family property. Then you have people like me who come here upon retirement, live here for 20 years, get too old to maintain a place, and then we leave and go live next to our kids or something. So you have this kind of revolving door, and you don't have people coming here and staying forever like you do in cities. So I think that's part of the problem. It's just the nature of this area.
Okay, Mr. Gillespie?
If you follow the housing market, the rental market follows it as well. Both of those things have an impact on affordable housing, which are all tied to the economy. So when the economy is roaring along good, housing, it becomes harder to buy a home because the market is very active and those homes are not sitting on the market long. The rental properties, the same thing happens to them. They don't sit on the market long, and it's kind of, it's a vicious cycle. As the economy turns down, you know, then we tend to see housing become more affordable. Problem is we're not working, we can't afford to buy the house, or we can't afford to rent the house. But I think, you know, we have worked on that issue in Macon County, and that has been done with some success here. The rental market is extremely tight right now, as it is everywhere. But when you go back and look at your real estate market, you're also seeing folks that are listing their home on Tuesday, and on Thursday, they're getting 2 full price offers, and then the bidding war starts. So I think as long as we see that in our economy, then it's going to be hard for us to address any type of affordable housing, because we can't, it takes time to get affordable housing in place. You know, we've been fortunate to have some set aside housing put here in Macon County, and it is considered affordable housing, but those are full with a waiting list. So I think, you know, I'm certainly thankful for a robust economy, and I want to see our economy continue to be robust. But I think affordable housing is one of those challenges that we will have and we will continue to have as long as the economy is good. The solution, I don't think it's a government solution. I think government can play their part in it, but I think it's a private industry is where the solution to that is. We're seeing that in other communities. A perfect example of that is look around in universities. Take Western Carolina University, who's over in Jackson County, tremendous amount of growth. They have not been able to keep up with the housing needs over there. So they're doing public-private partnerships to provide that housing. So I think we need to start, we can think along those lines to be able to provide that type of housing.
Okay. One follow-up question. When you all both talked a little bit about the living wage, one thing that wasn't addressed is how do we think that living wage is going to impact rural business owners? There's very few large corporate employers here in the community. And do you feel like the living wage will impact just our overall economy if we push that for our small business owners? How are we going to protect that? Susan, would you like to start?
Sure. It will affect them, and they may have to charge a little bit more for some of their goods or their services in order to pay that. Research, though, shows that it doesn't really hurt the business owners as much as you would think. So they're always afraid that it will, but when it comes down to it, that's not what happens. Like I was saying, the money goes right back into the community. So if you have people that, say you have an independent bookstore, if you have people in the community making more money, they can afford to go to that bookstore and buy a book. So what happens is that you get an increase in business because people actually have some money to spend. And I'm not just saying that, that's what the research shows. So I don't see it as necessarily hurting small businesses. It's not like if you're going to buy something, it's going to go up by that $15, to pay an employee. It'll just go up a little bit, but it's spread out over time. It's spread out over whatever your goods and services are. So I think that's more of a scare tactic than a reality.
Okay, Carl?
I think it absolutely will impact our small businesses. Being a small business owner, I know what labor cost is part of our bottom line. I have a friend of mine who's in produce and flowers, and we were having this very discussion, and he said, right now there's a big box in town who is selling their product. They're selling their product for 40% less than what I can buy it for. I can't afford to give up anything else and try to compete with that. So, yes, I think it will impact it. And another point I'd like to make about raising the minimum wage is if we raise that minimum wage, I think before we could have those conversations or during those conversations, we need to determine what that number is. And then we need to determine how many people is this really going to impact? What's the percentage of the population that's going to be impacted by an increase in minimum wage to $10 or $12 or $15? How many people are we talking about? How many lives are we going to impact? How big a deal is this? I think we need to sit down and look at that, and that needs to be part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor Bond.
Thank you, Jackie. If I may interject here, one common agreement that I'm sensing on both sides here is the isolation that we perceive and we feel here in the far western counties from our state capital, both geographically and sometimes philosophically too. A very innocuous question here. Carl, in Macon County, can you receive Asheville television? WLOS? I honestly don't know. Can you get Asheville TV?
Yes, we can. And
okay.
And that's an unfortunate situation for those in the western, way west. I think we're west, but when you get way west, right, you're getting Atlanta news or you're getting Chattanooga news.
Yes, Atlanta. Susan, I assume you can't get Channel 13 out of Asheville, can you?
I've never seen it unless I've been in Asheville. We get Chattanooga news.
Chattanooga. Well, I get Atlanta.
NBC,
so, yeah, Carl, you understand my point that there's a political debate coming up between Madison Cawthorn and Mo Davis. doesn't do me any good that it's on Channel 13. So it adds to the feeling of isolation over here from the rest of the state, as if we don't count in this. Just interjecting for apropos of nothing, I guess. Moving right along, our third presenter and also our third co-sponsor of today's forum, from Mountain True, we have Miss Callie Moore. She's the Western Regional Director of Mountain True. Now, we've known Callie for 17 years as the director of the Hiwassee Rivershed Coalition. But the coalition has now merged with a larger organization, Mountain True, that covers all of Western North Carolina, but with the same goals in mind. Mountain True, they're champions of resilient forests, clean waters, and healthy communities. Mountain True envisions thriving communities in our mountain region that are connected to and help sustain both each other and our natural environment. To achieve this, Mountain True tries to empower residents throughout the region to engage in community planning, policy and project advocacy, and on-the-ground projects. So with that, Callie Moore, I understand you have some questions about the environment. Take it away.
Thanks, Harry. The first question. In 1996, the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, newly renamed the North Carolina Land and Water Fund, was established to offer competitive grants to nonprofits and governments for projects to improve water quality and conserve land. Nonprofit organizations here in the 120th district have used these funds to the fullest advantage, conserving hundreds of acres of land and restoring more than 30 miles of streams and rivers. Some local elected officials in the district, though, do not support using tax dollars to fund these grants for activities that occur largely on private lands. What is your stance on this matter? Would you continue to support funding for the North Carolina Land and Water Fund if you were elected? And we'll start with Carl on this one.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I absolutely would. Being a farmer, I feel like I'm a member of a group of some of the greatest conservationists that have ever been able to be on this land. So I very much would support that. And just a little history, and I think you'll appreciate this. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to work over in Clay County for Mr. E.J. Whitmer on Brasstown Farm. And Mr. Whitmer had concrete cattle crossings in the creek and had the creeks fenced out. This would have been in the late 70s. And I thought it was to keep the tractors from getting muddy when we drove through the creek. But one day when we had just a few minutes, he explained to me what the big picture was. So I had the opportunity in the late 70s to work for somebody who was able to produce beef and farm in an environmentally friendly way. And if you come to our farm, you might see some things that reminded you of Mr. Whitmer's place. So I appreciate that question very much.
Susan?
It's interesting you mentioned that farm and water quality. I buy my beef from Brasstown Beef. I live about 5 minutes from it. It's excellent beef. I recommend it to everybody. But it does concern me that they have all those cattle right there in the creek. And I mean literally in the creek sometimes, because that's not great for water quality. Anytime you have cows, you have runoff from fields where you have cows, that puts matter, not to get too detailed, into the water that you don't want. I think about water quality a lot for a couple of reasons. Half of my front yard is what's called a fen, which is basically a swampy low area because we're kind of backed up against a big hillside. And it's actually an unnamed tributary of Martin's Creek. Martin's Creek flows all the way down the road and eventually runs into the Hiwassee River. And then the Hiwassee River winds its way through the mountains and eventually runs into the Tennessee River. At the point where the Hiwassee River hits the Tennessee River is where my family moved to, and they've lived there probably since the Cherokee removal. I think I come from a long line of poor dirt farmers, and I think after the Cherokee removal, they were the people that moved into that, what had been Cherokee territory. And they lived there until my grandmother sold her place, and I guess I was in my 20s then. It's been a while. So I feel very connected to that waterway and that system. I've never lived more than a mile away from my drinking water source in my whole life. I've just been fortunate about that. And I've become real aware of it because of my daughters I mentioned earlier that are in the science fields. My daughter in Chattanooga works for the city in water quality, and her specialty is botany. And what she does is she designs these bioretention areas, and she designs the plants, the native plants that are going to help filter the water. That is so important, to do water quality in a way that will last forever. These plants will be there as long as they're, kind of minimally maintained. They don't need a lot of care. We absolutely need to take care of our water quality. We're very fortunate in this part of the state to have a lot of water. You can dig a hole anywhere and you're going to find water. That's not true everywhere. I think as climate change gets worse over time, that we're likely to see a lot of climate refugees in this area. This is something my daughters tell me. The desert is moving. It's moving in this direction, but we're going to be protected here for a long time. Water is going to become more and more important over time. Atlanta has been in a dispute with Tennessee for years because they want to actually change the border. They claim that it used to be in one place and now it's in another, because they want part of the Tennessee River. They want that water so they can pipe it into Atlanta. Atlanta doesn't have the amount of water they're going to need as they continue to grow. So water quality is essential, not only for drinking, but for our area, for fishing, for any kind of water sports. If we didn't have clean enough water, we wouldn't have the rafting that we do, especially over here in my section of the state. So I think that the government definitely should be involved in water quality and that they should be more stringent.
Thank you, Susan and Carl. I can't resist taking just a short minute to follow up on Carl's experiences with the E.J. Whitmire Farm. Probably about 10 years ago, the Clean Water Management Trust Fund actually, Mainspring Conservation Trust, which was then the Land Trust for the Little Tennessee, everybody keeps changing names and merging. But they got a Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant to put 450 acres of EJ's farm, which is now Steve Whitmire's farm, Brasstown Beef, under a conservation easement. And so it will be a working farm and forest forever. And those are the types of projects that I'm talking about. And so I'm glad to hear that both of you would support that North Carolina Land and Water Fund going into the future. All right, my second question is, I was glad to read that you both recognize that our rapidly changing climate is an important issue and that state government can play an important role in helping reduce the impacts of climate change. Although sea level rise and coastal flooding are very visible and much discussed impacts of climate change, Western North Carolina is seeing impacts as well. Specifically, we're seeing a documented increase in severe weather events, which puts a great deal of stress on our infrastructure, including roads and sewer systems. As a state representative, how could you help? And we'll start with Susan on this one.
You know, part of it is education. A lot of times people don't think about that. Here in Murphy, we have a road that's right on top of a creek. you know, they could have chosen to put the road somewhere else. It might have been a little bit more expensive. But what happens is that we have a really hard rain. It washes out all the dirt under that road, and then you have a sinkhole. I can't even count the number of sinkholes they've had in this one stretch. Sometimes it's in the road, sometimes it's in the front yard of a business that's there. It's been very expensive in the long run to do that. And a lot of it has to do with just not thinking ahead, not looking at the consequences of taking shortcuts. I think that water issues are going to become more and more important. How to manage water, how to manage emergency situations having to do with the environment. One of my daughters I mentioned is working on a fire right now. She's a GIS specialist and she makes maps for the firefighters. And I've learned a lot from her about, you know, the climate change and what it's doing to the areas that she works in the Southwest. She lives in Texas, but she ends up working all over the West on these fires and being called out to them. In this part of the country, we don't have so much a problem with fires yet, but we did a few years ago. You remember in 2016, it got really dry and we had fires in this area. Climate change is just essential to address. If we don't address it, we're just not taking care of the citizens here. I think that the legislature needs to do a lot when it comes to education. Schools do a lot with what they can with basic education of students. But I think most citizens don't realize how things are connected. They don't see how if the climate changes in California and there's more fires there, that means that there's more smoke and air pollution here. And that affects the water quality that we drink. All this particulate comes down out of the sky, gets into our groundwater. I think people don't see that connection. That's why I think a lot of it has to do with education. That's why I think organizations like yours, Callie, are really important to teach people those things. And I know that you do a lot, that your office does that. So I think that education has to come first. And then the state needs to look at what can they do realistically. They can't change the environment, but they can do things like improve the sewage that we have, the sewage systems. I know the one at our house probably, which is new. When we bought our house, it's all brand new, but I don't think it's up to the standards it should be. I think there are things that the state could do to help the environment by setting standards that they don't have right now.
I think when we start talking about climate change and if you could drill down on one component of that multiple groups have identified as being a substantial contributing factor to that, you have to talk about promoting clean and renewable energy. I think the advancement of any advancements that we can make in regards to clean energy in the United States could possibly make the largest impact on that. I think that there's certainly been some initiatives to become 100% clean energy. I don't know that that's a realistic expectation, but I do believe that focusing on those clean energies will pay dividends in regards to climate change, but the economic impact of those industries, the development of those technologies and the deployment of those technologies could have a substantial impact on our economy. So I think sometimes we view that as kind of a doom and gloom thing, but I don't subscribe to that. I think there's some opportunities there.
Thank you both for those answers. Okay, the last question. Between 2008 and 2018, North Carolina cut funding for its environmental agencies programs that are meant to reduce air and water pollution by 34%. Funding went from $136.3 million to $90 million when adjusting for inflation. The state also cut its staff levels by 35%. A budget deal between the House and the Senate last year would have given the agency funds for a long-sought renovation of its main Reedy Creek laboratories in Raleigh, as well as additional personnel for testing emerging contaminants. But that deal, along with the rest of the state budget, ended in late June of last year after the bill was vetoed by Governor Roy Cooper, and the legislature and executive branch subsequently failed to reach an alternative agreement. Considering how important clean water and the environment are to our tourism-based economy in this district, what is your commitment to making sure the NC Department of Environmental Quality has the resources it needs? And we'll start with Mr. Gillespie this time.
I would support legislation to make sure that they do receive the funding that they need. You know, when you look at, I can't remember the Reedy Creek property, how old that facility is, but it is certainly in need of some restoration. I think that's probably a nice way to put it. But I think that the potential was there for that funding to exist. And if I'm fortunate enough to be there, I would absolutely support that.
I agree totally. I mean, I think I would support just about any legislation that made sense, that's going to help the environment. I'm really proud to live in North Carolina, where the solar panels are so common, especially over here. And I think we're number 2 in the country in terms of the production of solar energy. That's really something to be proud of. And I hope it continues. Any legislation that's going to help save our water in particular, but also our air, would be something that I would be interested in supporting. Like I said, for anything that made sense. You know, besides our health, our children, the things that are external to us, there's nothing more important than the environment. We're not going to survive without it. So we have to have a decent environment, good air to breathe. One of my other daughters, I know it sounds like I have about 12, I just have 3, but one of my other daughters lives in California near Sacramento, and she and her husband both have a history of asthma, and they have been living in a smoke-filled environment now for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I hear from her 2 or 3 times a week, and she'll call and she'll go, "Oh, I saw a little bit of blue sky today." They're having to stay inside, use an air filtration system just to breathe. You know, the whole West is burning up. It's a huge issue. And like I said, I think we're going to have environmental refugees coming to this part of the country, because compared to a lot of areas of our country, we're actually in pretty good shape. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And I was going to ask pretty much the identical follow-up question that Mary asked Mr. Gillespie about working across the aisle and so forth regarding the budget negotiations, but I feel like you've sufficiently answered that the people of the district are going to be what's the highest priority for you. So I'll refrain from asking the same question again. So I'm seeing in the chat that because we have extra time, we are going to allow questions from the audience, from the participants at this time. And so what you're being asked to do as an attendee, if you have a question for one or both of the candidates, is to, in your chat, I just closed mine. You need to select all panelists. Is that what you want, Susan?
Callie, if you can hear me, I'm not sure it'll matter. I think they only have one option as attendees.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if they put anything into the chat, it should show up for all of us.
Okay, great. So if you would just locate your chat at the bottom of the screen, if you just hover over the screen, you'll see a little balloon icon that says chat below it. And if you pull that up, you can type questions, and I see people are already starting to do that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Harry now, assuming, Harry, you've got your chat open and you can see these questions that are coming in. And all the panelists, if you open your chat, you should be able to see the questions so that you can kind of read along with Harry as he's asking them.
Okay, thank you, Callie and Susan. So the first one that you may be able to read in chat is from Protect NC to both of our panelists, expressing appreciation for your thoughtful answers. The question is how you would see your role as the district rep in the House of Representatives in reducing the, quote, brain drain, unquote, that we experience in Western North Carolina. Our brightest students go to college in Raleigh, Charlotte, and they do not come back because they don't see opportunities here for professional growth in Western North Carolina. Do you have thoughts about how to meet this challenge? Susan, would you like to try and field that? It's a hard question.
Sure. You know, that's not a problem just here. That's a problem all over. We're a very mobile country, a lot more than we used to be. And young people are going to go where the jobs are. And unfortunately, most of them are out west. They're not in the east. One of the things that would help, though, is if our schools offered more and had the opportunity to offer more. A lot of our schools here are very small. One of the volunteer things that I do is evaluate the applications for the Ronald McDonald scholarships for this area. So the area for the Ronald McDonald House nearest us includes some of North Georgia, Southeast Tennessee, and this part of North Carolina. So every spring, this usually happens in March, I get a bunch of applications, me and lots of other people. And we go through, and there's a rating guide, and we are evaluating a lot of different parts of these scholarship applications. So I have a chance to see what high school students are taking in their various schools. So the ones that are sent to me aren't necessarily from here. I do get some from the Murphy area or Andrews, but I also get them from Georgia and Tennessee. The difference in what is offered in the schools is so stark. Students in this area simply can't compete because they're not being offered the same classes that students elsewhere are. And that leads to some of the problems with the education and education funding. It also leads to, in my way of thinking, it has to do also with how our county commissioners don't make the hard decisions. It's a hard decision, and it's hard on a community, and it's always unpopular to do things like close schools and consolidate. But if you have a high school that has maybe 600 students, you're not going to be able to offer a lot of advanced classes or advanced maths and advanced chemistry. Those kids need those skills in order to get jobs here. They don't all have to go to college. I see a lot of students that are getting great training in high school for the healthcare industry. So by the time they graduate from high school, they're prepared to go into a hospital and work as a transcriptionist or phlebotomist or something like that, because they've had great training. And these kids are also taking, you know, the classes that would allow them to get into college too. This isn't like trade school. This is what an ordinary high school is offering. So part of this has to do, I think, with what is being offered and kind of the attitude we have about schools. A lot of times they don't want to consolidate schools. They want to keep neighborhood schools. But the truth of it is we can't afford neighborhood schools. And I hate saying that, that hasn't always been true, but people are not willing to pay the taxes that it costs to have neighborhood schools. So what they need to do is to look at what's being offered in the high schools and focus, target for the job market that is here and can expand. For instance, computer skills. And again, I go back to broadband. Tech jobs are so big. A lot of people work from home. More are going to work from home from now on because of the pandemic. And so without the education, though, you're going to have those people going elsewhere to seek that education. That's the point I'm trying to make. When they leave high school here, they're not prepared to go get a job except a minimum wage entry-level job. But if they graduated from a high school that offered a lot more, then they would be able to go, maybe I can work for a couple of years at this kind of job and then start my own business where I live instead of having to leave my family. So I think that's part of the solution. But I think it's also a bigger problem than just here.
Thank you, Susan. Carl, do you have thoughts about how the state legislature could possibly help us prevent or encourage young people to be able to return to their hometown to live and work?
I think I have a unique perspective on that. Given after I got out of school, I left Macon County and spent 17 years working away from home. You know, when you're young, you have a different set of priorities than what you have when you get a little gray hair. So I think that we need to recognize that. And you know, some of the very things that was discouraging to me when I moved from Macon County was actually what was the most appealing to me to move back. You know, one of the things that Susan touched on that we absolutely agree on is the broadband issue. I think that the thing we need to keep in mind is there's a lot of communities up and down the Appalachian Mountains that have a lot of the same things that we have to offer. Whoever wins the broadband issue, whoever maximizes that is going to win the ball game. Because I think that's going to be the deciding factor for a lot of people that A, are looking to move here, and B, for opportunities for our young folks to stay here. I think I would also agree with Susan on the educational opportunities. I think that the more that we can do from an educational standpoint, the better chance we have of retaining those students. You know, over the past couple months, I've been around and met with all the school board superintendents and the chairs of the school board, and we've had those conversations, and they're more than prepared along with the county commissioners in all the counties to make the tough decisions. I know Cherokee County is going through that right now. So I think that if we can further those educational opportunities, both from an undergraduate standpoint and from a trade standpoint, you know, our trade folks are hurting. We're all hurting. All of us that are in the trades, we need more trade help. So it's supply and demand is certainly there. So we've got an opportunity to retain our trade people if we can get more trained. On the undergraduate side, I think there's some opportunities there that we're not capitalizing on. But the issue that we're going to have with all the young folks, and I'll use my son as an example, when he went to Georgia Tech, and he connected his computer to the network, and it was a gigabit up and a gigabit down. When he come home at the end of that first month, he didn't even take his computer out because it was totally unacceptable. So I think that we need to understand that mindset, and that's the direction that we need to move.
All right, thank you, Carl. We've had another question come in from a listener, from Pat Wickstrom, who says he's worked for 30 years in the hospital industry, and he's wondering, as a representative, what would you do to help keep our small rural hospitals viable? Carl, would you start?
Be glad to, Harry. Thank you. I think if I had that formula and I could bottle it, it'd be another one of those money makers for me. I think, you know, it's unfortunately, I think that the hospital system that those of us, and certainly in my generation, grew up with, in that we all had a community hospital. That landscape has totally changed. You know, we also grew up with, we went to the, for some of us is old enough to remember this, we went to the same doctor for everything. Whether you had a stumped toe or a broke leg, the same doctor fixed that. Where we moved from that to specialized care. Now, our hospitals are the landscape is changing there, and these smaller community hospitals are there to serve a different purpose, and it's unfortunately it's the economics of it that's driving it. So I think that it's going to be extremely hard to change that trend, just because those hospitals are not able to stay in business. And the way that the hospitals are changing, in that the specialized care is in a central location that none of us like to travel to, including me. I think those are the type of efforts that are being made to make those hospitals be able to be solvent.
Susan, would you like to respond?
Yes, I agree with Carl that this is a battle, a losing battle, really. From what I've read, the hospitals, small hospitals, can't afford the kinds of expensive, really expensive equipment and the changes that have come about over the last 10 or 20 years. So that kind of forces people into going to bigger hospitals that have specialized equipment and the people to run them. And they're never going to have that. You know, little tiny Murphy Hospital here is not ever going to have, you know, like, I don't know, I'm not a medical person, but like a heart lung bypass machine, let's say, because they're just too small to need it. My husband recently, I guess it's been about 6 or 8 weeks ago, had to go to the hospital to have some testing. And it was early in the morning, and I sat outside in the car because of COVID. And so I was in the car waiting on him to come out. And I was out there for probably an hour and a half outside the entrance, the early morning entrance, which was the ER. In that hour and a half to 2 hours that I was there, 2 people walked into the hospital, 2. And it really struck me. I thought, how can a hospital stay in business if they've got the equivalent of 1 person an hour walking in there? And this wasn't like at 4 in the morning. This was, you know, 6 to 8 a.m. when hospitals are doing a lot of testing like that. I would like to see an approach, instead of hospitals always competing with each other, that they collaborate and have one medical center area that does have some specialty care. I have glaucoma and I see a glaucoma specialist, but I have to drive to Chattanooga because that's the nearest glaucoma specialist to me. You know, I would love to have one closer. The one that I go to actually has property in Hiawassee. And I'm really, really hoping when she retires, she comes up this way and opens up an office so I don't have to drive to her. I would like to see a regional medical center instead of having 4 or 5 small hospitals, have one larger hospital that has a lot of outpatient clinics. I think that's the only way these small hospitals are ever going to survive.
All right, thank you, Susan. We have one last question from our listeners, and it's kind of a follow-up to the fact that both of you have agreed on the need for broadband in our area. Of course, the difficult thing is, you know, who's going to fund it? But the question relates to the fact that currently the North Carolina legislature legally has prevented any local county governments or town governments from trying to create their own fiber connectivity. So it's kind of left up to, you know, private industry corporations to control broadband access. So this question is where do you stand on allowing local governments to try and get into the infrastructure here if nobody else will? So Carl, I'll go back to you.
Thank you. I've been in this business since the early 80s. I've been fortunate to install and splice the first fiber cable that was deployed for cable TV networks. I've been on the forefront of development of product for voice connectivity and network connectivity. So that's kind of my background, and because of that, I don't think that the local government needs to be in the internet business. I do believe that the laws should be relaxed and there should be some new legislation. Representative Corbin worked very hard to get some legislation passed that would allow some flexibility in the local county's ability to issue grants for the expansion of broadband. I think that there are certain towns and counties that have infrastructure in that could be utilized by a private carrier. And I think that there needs to be, the legislation needs to follow that to make sure that we are encouraging that, not discouraging it. Many people believe that the current legislation gives an unfair advantage to the larger carriers. And I wouldn't have a problem with that if I could call those larger carriers and order me an internet circuit in Graham County. But the fact of the matter is that those carriers do not provide services in our area. So I think it's a perfect example of the rural part of North Carolina being penalized because of some legislation that when it was passed, it was for a specific reason and it served that purpose well. There was some governments that got in trouble through trying to expand broadband. They underestimated the cost of it. They underestimated the revenue flow, and it had the potential of causing some real issues. So the North Carolina legislature identified that, and they took steps to prevent that from happening again. So it did its job, but there was some things that also came along with that was not positive. So I think we need to relook at that. I think Representative Corbin and some of his colleagues have tried to do that, and we need to create a environment that environment can and will consist of grants and additional monies to encourage those private carriers to build in these rural counties on both sides of Raleigh. But up here in particular, you know, I tell my friends from down east, we're on a rock, and we can't get everywhere aerial. There's a certain amount of it has to be underground, and it becomes very expensive. So, we're going to have to work with private carriers to provide that additional funding to offset it to where it's a break even or a money making situation for them, so they will expand those networks.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Susan, what are your thoughts about the state getting involved?
I get real fired up about this issue, so I'm sorry if I come across as kind of strident on it. I disagree with Carl on this. What happens when you have the businesses in charge of it is that they get to pick their customers. They haven't picked me. In living here for 7 years, I have no more options for broadband than I had when I bought my house 7 years ago. And the reason is I live on a stretch of road that doesn't have a lot of houses. So they have fiber optic that is coming out of Georgia that comes up about a half mile up my road and then stops. Going the other direction, there's kind of a subdivision, and they have fiber optic. In between, we have satellite service if you're lucky enough to be out from under the trees and the ridges to get satellite service. Or there's Frontier, which we had for a while, and that was the really terrible service I was telling you about. Their customer service is pitiful and their actual service was bad. They would come through and mow the line every summer, and we would be without for weeks. I think that counties, towns, states, whoever should look at broadband as a utility and treat it as a utility, and tell these private companies, if you're going to be here, you've got to offer it to everybody. You can't just pick and choose your customers. It has to be available. People don't have to buy it, but it does have to be available to everyone. It's really holding us back. Living in Chattanooga, I got to see there were different broadband companies early on. And the public electric power board there decided they wanted to go into the fiber optic realm. So they formed, I think it was like their own separate little company, but they were owned. They were fought tooth and nail by every entity you can imagine, the state, all these PACs, all these, different companies that wanted to make a lot of money off of it. And everybody was against it. They prevailed all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. This went on for years. They won. They ended up wiring the entire county so that anybody who lives in that county at least has access to it. You can get unlimited internet access. The slowest you can get is 100 megabytes per second for $60 a month. That's the lowest level you can get. I pay $147 a month for 50 gigabytes, and I tear through that every month. So at the end of the month, I'm down to about 1 megabyte per second. I don't stream anything. I can't stream Netflix. I hate it when somebody says, oh, look at this video. I can't see the video. It's going to freeze up on me. It holds us all back. It holds back business. It's just essential to have it. And the private businesses have had an opportunity to expand this for years, and they have chosen not to. They've chosen not to because they're only going after targeted areas where they can make the most money. That's got to change. Otherwise, places like ours will be left behind. That's the one thing I can think of that will drive me out of these beautiful mountains is the lack of broadband access.
All right, thank you, Susan. I'm going to have to let that be the last question because though we were ahead of time, we promised at the beginning that we would allow each guest here to have 3 minutes for closing remarks of whatever they would like to say to promote their candidacy for government. Now, before I do that, let me go ahead and again thank our 3 co-sponsors, which is the Public Policy Network, PPN, the Hinton Rural Center, and Mountain True. We thank all 3 of those organizations for making this forum possible today. And most especially, we want to extend our thanks to Susan Bean of Mountain True's Community Engagement Coordinator, because she was the technical expert that set up the Zoom conference and made it all happen. Without her, this wouldn't have been possible. So thank you, Susan. Now, having said that, Carl, we started with you, so we'll end with you. You have 3 minutes for however you'd like to wrap up talking about your candidacy, sir.
Well, first I want to say thank you to everyone that worked to put this together. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's been very informative for the voters, and I certainly would be open to revisiting any issue that we've talked about. Now, in closing, I would just say I love calling Western North Carolina my home. You know, I worked on the road for 17 years, as I mentioned earlier. And when anybody asked me, it didn't matter whether I was in Japan or California or Chattanooga, when they asked me where I was from, I said, Franklin, North Carolina. And I'm very proud to say that. As a native, I grew up fishing, camping, rock hunting, riding the back roads and climbing all over these mountains. And as I traveled in and out of the country, I came to realize how truly blessed that I've been to grow up in this region. I'm a small business owner and I understand the business issue that a small business faces. I'll bring that experience with me. My family and I live on a family farm where we raise registered Black Angus cattle. Being a farmer, I think I can represent the region with this knowledge and experience. As I mentioned earlier, I've traveled throughout the 120th district, met with elected officials. And when I met with them, Harry, you remember the one question I asked: what do you need from your North Carolina House representative that would help you better serve the citizens you represent? Additionally, I've made multiple trips to the North Carolina legislature, spending time with Senator Davis and Representative Corbin. During those trips, I had an opportunity to visit with many of the legislators, and I also had an opportunity to visit with the leadership in the North Carolina House. I was able to attend committee meetings. I spent multiple days on the North Carolina House floor. I've done my best, I feel, to prepare for this. I never started out to be an elected official. I was appointed to be on the Macon County Planning Board, and I served on it for several years. Through being a public servant, I became familiar with the needs of the county and the projects that were on the table. When I was asked to run for county commissioner, I decided to because I felt like I was up to speed on the needs of the citizens and would be able to continue to work towards accomplishing some of the very projects the planning board had been tasked to work on. Since being elected as a commissioner in Macon County, I've taken the job of serving very seriously. I've learned a lot from it, and when Senator Davis announced his retirement, our current representative, Kevin Corbin, decided to run for the Senate seat. After conversation with several folks in the 120th district, I decided that my experiences had prepared me to represent the citizens of the 120th district. And if elected, I will be its voice. I will represent it with integrity and enthusiasm. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for being here. And now, Susan Landis, you have 3 minutes to tell the people why they should consider your candidacy.
Sorry, my dogs were making noise, so I muted myself. Thank you all for setting this up and being so good about sending the reminders and the links and everything like that. Sometimes that's the tricky part. I really appreciate what you've done. I was dreading this just a little bit. I've never been in any kind of a debate, but this was very enjoyable. The reason I decided to run is because I want people to hear from more than one side on the various issues. And I think that a lot of times this area tends to be dominated by Republicans. We're outnumbered 2-to-1, some places 3-to-1. And it's hard to get a Democrat to run. I've got nothing better to do, and I thought I might as well run. Somebody needed to, and I feel like it's a civic duty to do what we can to make sure that our voices are heard, whichever side of the aisle people are on. So that's the reason I decided to run. If you're interested in learning more about me, you can go to susanlandisnc.com. That's my website. And you can send me a direct message anytime. And I don't have a staff, so I will answer it. Somebody asked me if they could get a message to me. I said, I'm right here. I think that this area has so much to offer. I live here by choice. I could live anywhere in the country, but I live here because I've always loved it. I've loved camping here all of my adult life. I love nothing better than driving these curvy, windy mountain roads. And I want this place to be as good as it can be. And I will do everything that I can to make sure that we move toward my vision of that. And I think it's the vision of a lot of people. Nothing extreme, nothing radical. It's simply to make sure that Western North Carolina gets recognized and its needs get recognized. I think the voice is lost sometimes. I do have a little bit of experience in working with the legislature through the Senior Tar Heels, and they work, it's an advocacy group to get funding for senior programs. And I'm the representative for Cherokee County. And we actually go to Raleigh 3 times a year and have meetings and draft legislation. And then during, I think it's the long session of the legislature, our recommendations are taken to the legislature. So I have a little bit of experience in doing that. And what we work on, this is a totally nonpartisan group. It doesn't have anything to do with being a Democrat or a Republican. But the goal is to make sure that we get funding for services like senior centers, Meals on Wheels, transportation for seniors in this area.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan Landis. Mary Lackner, I'm going to throw it back to you for a final goodbye in just a moment, but I would like to throw in a shameless plug before I go. The fact that I have the privilege of co-hosting a radio show 5 mornings a week called Mountain Mornings on WJUL Radio 97.1 at 7:40 a.m. Now, a lot of people don't have FM radios anymore, but it is live streamed at WJULradio.com. And my point being is I think the show complements in many ways what the PPN network is doing in terms of trying to provide guests to inform the public. Right now, we've been having a lot of the candidates on, as I mentioned before. Mr. Gillespie and Ms. Landis have both individually on different days, we only have one guest today, been able to be on our show. And we have a number of other guests coming up, whether it's Mo Davis, Madison Cawthorn. We opened it all to both parties, anybody that's willing to be on our show. So hopefully we're doing what PPN is, and that's just providing a forum to inform people. And I welcome you to tune in at 7:40 in the morning. Now, having said that, Mary, would you like to wrap this up and say goodbye?
Yes, thank you, Harry. One person that hasn't been thanked is Alex Douglas Bartolone. She's on the PPN steering committee, and she did a lot of work to plan our first candidate forum. And I'm really very appreciative of our co-sponsors and Harry, and of course the candidates. I wanted to let everybody know that we are going to be putting it on our YouTube channel, which you can access at our website, www.publicpolicynetwork.net. And we will also have it on our PPN elections Facebook page within the next couple days. And we thank Susan Bean at Mountain True for our ability to do that. So thanks very much again, everybody.